Hello folks, welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Now, the UEFA Women's 22 tournament gets underway on July 6th. The opening match takes place between England and Austria at Old Trafford. UEFA have announced that over 350,000 tickets for the tournament have already been sold. So it's now the time to really focus on the women's game and give it a boost for a change. Well, joining me to discuss, I'm delighted to say, is Janie Frampton, a former referee for the men's professional game. Janie, just on the Euros later this year, they are actually set, we know already, to break attendance records, already selling more tickets than the 2017 run. What do you reckon actually explains this surge in popularity?
Thank you. Good afternoon. I do believe this surge in popularity is in some of the countries, we're talking about particularly Asia, America, and in Europe now, they're promoting women's football a huge amount. And that means there was almost like a chicken and egg situation that needed to happen. And that was, you needed money invested into women's football before women's football became far more publicised on TV and radio and the coverage. Now, that seems to have happened. A lot of sponsorship has come in, and it seems that that has now promoted the women's game, which has then encouraged broadcasters to put it on mainstream channels, which has grown participation for sure.
And do you think the game being showcast more by broadcasters has something to do with it?
Yes, of course. And I get asked all the time, so what's women's football about? And I say, well, do you know what? Watch it and then come back to me with that question. But until people have watched it and they realise just how technical it is, and we've also got now this whole point where they need to stop comparing women's football to men's football because they're two different games. And you've got to value and respect each of those games on their own merits.
Yes, well, interestingly, it's interesting that you say that, because one thing, and I imagine it must frustrate you, people will say that women just aren't as skillful as the men and therefore it's not as interesting a game. Now, as a former referee of the men's game, how big is the gap in the quality of playing?
There's no gap. There's no gap. They're two different games. I used to always say that refereeing women's football was my passion. Refereeing the men's game was my challenge. Now, when you look at the two different games, you look at the physiology of men. They're bigger, stronger, they have more stamina than women, and that's research can back that up every single day of the week. But the women are actually more technical because they don't have the same strength and stamina as men. They rely on their skill and their tactics, so they play far more ball to feet. So it's far more tactical instead of playing long balls in the air.
Yeah, I was watching the Scotland game, women's football, and Erin Cuthbert, who also plays for Scotland, and she plays for Chelsea as well. A real story, a success story, and a success story of not just football, but of the union of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Do you think people like Erin are given enough chance? Because are there enough academies and coaches out there for the women's game? Are they able to actually bring in talented women and say, you've got it, we'll get you somewhere?
You know what? That's a really good question. And we could break that down even further. That do we have enough women role models as coaches? That is really paramount. Do we have enough male coaches that understand the needs of the women's game? And I say all the time, please don't tell me what we need as women until you've walked in our shoes or at least asked us what we need. So I think the answer to that is we need certainly to develop our women coaches. We've got great numbers that are out there now about the amount of women coaches we have, but we really need to look at far more in high-profile jobs and make it worthwhile for these women to take these high-profile jobs. Not offer them an amount of money that is nowhere near matching, not the equivalent to men, but something that is respectful to the role. And that is still not happening. There's still not enough money in the women's game to make that happen.
When you get comments from the Northern Ireland manager, for example, Kenny Shields, saying that girls and women are more emotional than men, so they take a goal going in not very well. You know, you get sort of, I guess, the caricature in my head is a woman getting a handbag out, which of course doesn't happen at all. What do you think when you hear remarks like this?
You know, that is firstly very disrespectful. Secondly, totally naive. And thirdly, I think he needs a lesson in emotional intelligence, because the research will show really clearly that women have a higher level of emotional intelligence because they understand the emotions all the way around of different situations, different people, and then they know how to behave and how to manage those situations. Now, that's research that can back that up. That's not me just talking to you. So yes, we are more emotional, but we also know how to use those emotions.
Yeah, a big question, of course, but what do you think actually needs to ultimately be done? I mean, we've sort of touched on it, but still, we've just heard an example there of the people being a little bit reluctant, perhaps, to even let women play, never mind watch women playing football. How do you think you get past those, I guess you would call them stigmas?
Yeah, and you know what, Darren, we're still a long way behind. We've come a long, long way, and I will never, ever put that down, because the growth in participation has been huge. We still need to see a growth in refereeing and coaching. We still need to see a growth in sponsors sponsoring women's football. More than anything, we need to see more women decision makers, because we still have so many men that are decision makers at the top end of our game that's not going to change anything until we get women involved in those decisions who can then give a balanced view of what it is that we need in the women's game to get it growing further.
Yeah, Janie Frampton, I don't know if you've seen, but the Prime Minister caused a bit of controversy recently when he was asked about participation in female sports of trans women, so biological men. Is that something that you've paid attention to? Are you concerned by this current trend and the argument over whether or not trans women should be able to participate in female sports?
It's a real tricky one. And I think the answer to that is every sport has to be dealt with differently, because you've got to look at the physiology involved in every sport. And I don't think there is a good answer, result. There's not a right or wrong. But I do think every sport now needs to look at this quite clearly to create a very fair playing field for both men and women and trans, so that you don't discriminate against the existing women who are participating. And I did a lot of work around the Caster Semenya case, and I researched a lot about the comments made by Martina Navratilova and about from Paula Radcliffe. And I understood their points, but actually this is really complicated, and every sport has to get this right. And there's no point our Prime Minister or anybody else coming out with flippant comments, because that's not going to solve anything. In fact, it ends up having a negative trend. I would like to see every single sport address this thoroughly to make sure there's a fair playing field for all.
I couldn't agree with you more, because I think ultimately we cannot get in a position where we're celebrating the success of women's sport only to create a very unequal playing field when it comes to actually the playing of women's sports. But Janie, to end, I wonder, answer me this, and I guess the answer will be an emphatic yes, but I assume you'll be supporting the Lionesses come July, right?
Oh my goodness, 100%. But I will also be supporting women involved in football per se, because hopefully we'll have some women officials at the Euros. I will support women coaches and managers, because I want to see the rise and the profile of women in football per se.
Janie Frampton, thank you very much for your time today. Have a nice day. The sunshine looks amazing.